Hi there, welcome to episode 11, Rendering. Looking at the image, you can see the fluid mesh is too dark on the left side. The background is also too dark. We could add more lights to improve these areas. Let's do this. But if you make changes in the scene view, you have to go back to the render view to see the result. To avoid coming back and forth between the scene and render views, it's better if we can see both views at the same time. Let's modify the layout. Go to the scene view. In the Paint tab Operations menu, select Split Pane Top Button. And now let's change the bottom pane to a render view. Right-click on the scene view, then select Mantra Rendering and then Render View. Check the render and the camera output. OK, before start rendering, to have a faster feedback, let's decrease the render pixel samples. Restore the bottom pane. Go to the Out context, then to the Rendering tab, and finally to the Sampling tab and decrease the pixel samples to 3. Press the Render button. And save a snapshot. OK, we are ready. Go to the Object context. To add a new light, let's copy an existing one. Press Alt and drag the right light. Rename the light as Fill Light. Change the viewport layout to 2 views side by side. And in the left view, in the camera menu, go to Look Through Light and select the Fill Light. Now, press on the lock button to lock the light. That way, we can move the light by moving the viewport. Start moving the view to point the light to fill the left shadows. Adjust the exposure. OK, the render is finished. Save a snapshot. If we compare it with the previous image, the illumination is better, but maybe the intensity needs to be decreased a little bit. Besides, we have a strange rectangular shadow at the center of the image. Let's disable the Preview button to check if it's only an artifact. OK, the strange rectangular shadow is gone. Let's also decrease the exposure of the fill light to 5 and the exposure of the inferior light to 5.5. Save a snapshot and compare. The last image is better. To illuminate the background without affecting the foreground, the best option is to use a spotlight. Click on the Spotlight button. Rename it as Spot BG. Now, in the left viewport, in the camera menu, go to Look Through Light and then select the Spot BG light. Enable the Preview button to have a faster feedback. Navigate in the left viewport to adjust the spotlight position. Adjust the exposure. Let's make some additional adjustments. Adjust the exposure. Now, to control the spotlight angle and the penumbra, go to the spotlight options and start changing the cone angle and also the penumbra or cone delta. Continue adjusting the position and the spotlight's parameters. Save a snapshot and compare. Once again, let's make some additional adjustments. Disable the preview button. Save a snapshot and compare. Let's check the right light. Select it. Now, in the left viewport in the camera menu, go to Look Through Light and select Right Light. Navigate in the viewport to adjust the light position. Let's also adjust the camera just a little bit. Save a snapshot and compare. I think we need to increase the light exposure. Try 5.5. It's better. Now, the raspberry looks a little dark, so we could use the emission trick to solve this issue. Besides, we could also decrease the roughness a little bit for both the milk and the raspberry. Let's do it. Go to the material context, select the milk shader and decrease the roughness to 0.15. Now, select the raspberry shader and decrease the roughness to 0.25. And in the emission color, set a dark reddish tone. For the color value B, set a small amount, 0.04. We need full saturation, so let's set it to 1. And set a reddish tone, 354 is almost red. Save a snapshot and compare it with the previous image. It's better. At the moment, the camera is static. Let's add some animation. Stop the render process. Return to the object context and select the camera. We are at frame 120. Let's reframe the shot. Now, to add a keyframe, press Alt and then left-click on the Translate and Rotate parameters. Now, go to frame 40. Let's zoom in and reframe the shot. Again, to add keyframes, press Alt and then left-click on the Translate and Rotate parameters. To set a linear animation for the camera, go to the animation editor. Use the F key to frame the curves and select them, and finally press the Strike button. Go back to the scene view. and make a flipbook to check. It's okay, return to frame 120. Okay, we are ready for the rendering process. Even for a simple project like this, it's important to plan what information we need to render. Of course, the color or beauty pass is the main information we need, but you could also need to render additional data to help you in the compositing process. For instance, you could need the diffuse pass, the reflection pass, or the depth pass. Additionally, you could need object masks. The rendering process can also be broken down into different render nodes. For instance, in our project, we could make a render for the mesh and the raspberry, and another for the background. Let's do this. Go to the out context. Press Alt and drag the render node. Now we have a copy. Rename the copy as background B01. Select the splash node and minimize the bottom pane. Go to the Objects tab. In the candidate objects, we can select the objects to be rendered. Delete the asterisk and search for the raspberry and the splash mesh. In this way, the background object is not rendered. If, for any reason, you need the background object as a matte, you should specify it in the forced matte parameter. And if you want the background object to still affect the scene but do not show, then you need to specify it in the force phantom parameter. Search for the BG object in the forced phantom parameter. In the candidate lights parameter, leave the asterisk to include all the scene lights. Press the render button. The background is gone. Right-click on the render view and select Color Correction. Right-click again and select the View Bar option. In the View Bar, press the Fit to Viewport button to frame the rendered image. Now, in the Color Correction toolbar, you can see, besides our color information, we have alpha information. Display the color information and save a snapshot. Restore the bottom pane, select the background node, and again, minimize the bottom pane to have more room. In the Objects tab, in the Candidate Objects parameter, just select the BG object. And in the Force Phantom parameter, search for the raspberry and the splash mesh. Before pressing the render button, change the output driver to the background node. Our simple background is rendered quickly. Save a snapshot. For the background, we just need to render one frame, and we don't need any additional passes, as this is a simple background. So let's increase the resolution and render the final image. Go to the Rendering tab, then to the Sampling tab, and increase the pixel sampling to 9. Stop the render process. Go to the Images tab and check that the output picture is correct. In the Valid Frame Range parameter, check that it is set up to render the current frame. And disable the Override Camera Resolution checkbox. Finally, press the Render to Disk button. Check the rendered image. Go to the menu and select Render, then Emplay and select Load Disk Files. Search for the image. Okay, here you are, a very simple background. The resolution is 1280 by 720, and the render time was 9 minutes and 23 seconds. Close the template view. Restore the bottom pane. Select the splash node and minimize the pane. In the render view, check the image with the milk and raspberry. We can see we have a global mask for both objects, but it's useful to have a mask for the raspberry and another for the milk. To get this functionality, Houdini and other 3D and composite programs have an open source software called Cryptomatte. In the Images tab, go to the Cryptomatte tab. Add a new Cryptomatte layer. For the property parameter, you have two options, material name or object name. With the first option, you get masks according to existing materials. And with the second option, you get masks according to the rendered objects. Select object name. It's better to generate a different file sequence. To do this, enable the different file checkbox and type a path. Let's correct the path. And to be more descriptive, change the channel name to OBJ instead of materials. To check the result, you have to render it to disk. Press the Render to Disk button to render the current frame. Check the rendered image. Go to the menu and select Render, then Emplay and select Load these files. Search for the file. In the image, we have the Crypto OBJ channel and one color for each object. In the compositing context, we can extract these colors to be used as masks. Close the Emplay view. Now, to add extra planes or passes with additional information to render, go to the Extra Image Planes tab. Here you can select the information you need to include for your compositing process. For instance, you could select the Shading Depth plane to apply depth of field effect in composition. We don't need any of these planes, but let's select the Direct Lighting and Indirect Lighting options. These two extra planes or passes will help us to evaluate the noise in the rendered images. Additionally, at the bottom, you can add more planes and even create custom passes. Let's add a plane. Click on the plus button. If you expand the menu, you have more planes to choose from. Select Combined Lighting per Light. This extra plane will give us an individual render per each light in our scene. In the Export Components parameter, erase Coat, Refract and Volume, because we don't have volumetric or transparent objects. Press the Render button in the Render view. We are rendering the background. Stop the render process and change the output driver to Splash V01. Press the Render button. OK, we have the rendered image. Stop the rendering process. Now, in the view bar, you can see all the extra planes. The Direct Diffuse plane with the Direct Diffuse color information. The Direct Reflect plane with the direct reflections. The Direct SSS plane with the direct subsurface scattering information, but we have a good amount of noise. The Indirect Diffuse plane with the indirect diffuse information, and we also have noise here. The Indirect Reflect plane with the indirect reflections. The Indirect SSS plane with the indirect subsurface scattering information, and we have a lot of noise in this image. This information is important to adjust the render settings. Besides, we get passes for each of the scene lights. Let's check backlight, inferior light, right light, fill light, and spotlight. Go back to the beauty pass or color information. Remember, the Cryptomatte passes don't show up here, they are only saved to disk. Okay, we are ready. Let's check some render parameters. Check that the output picture path is correct. This is where the rendered images will be saved to disk. Disable the Override Camera Resolution checkbox to render the full camera resolution. In the Valid Frame Range parameter, check that it is set up to render frame range and set the initial frame to 40 and the last frame to 120. Go to the Rendering tab, then to the Sampling tab. To help us with the noise issue with the subsurface scattering and with the indirect diffuse, increase the diffuse and SSS quality to 2. Increase the pixel sample to 6. In the frame range, return to render current frame and press the Render to Disk button. Check the rendered image. Go to the menu and select Render. Then in Play and select Load these files. Search for the image. Okay, here you are. The image is 1280 by 720 pixels and the render time was 36 minutes and 7 seconds with a pixel sample of 6 by 6. Let's check the extra planes. The Direct Diffuse plane, the Direct Reflect plane, the Direct SSS plane, the Indirect Diffuse plane, the Indirect Reflect plane, the Indirect SSS plane. Okay, there is much less noise in the problematic passes. Close the mPlay window. Change the valid frame range to Render Frame Range. To improve the quality, I'm going to increase the pixel samples to 8 by 8. Let's restore the layout. Minimize the bottom pane and select Single View for the viewport. And now we are ready to render the sequence of images. In the next video, we are going to load the render images in the compositing context and then making a basic composition. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you soon in the next one.